You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking to veteran journalist and critic Noel Manning about the man, the myth, the legend, Earl Owensby. Noel has known Earl for quite a long time. We get into it. Earl's movies, how Noel met Earl Owensby, their multiple decades of friendship, Earl Owensby's impact to the North Carolina filming industry and beyond, and so much more. Here we go. Keep it pretty casual, but I've got a little bit of an intro here because I do want to make sure to go over all your, what's the phrase, the bona fides, everything in the parentheses behind your name, and let folks know that you are legitimate. You don't mind, no.
Because we are definitely not legitimate, so it helps when we have someone who is legitimate.
Absolutely. And folks are listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. We are somewhat a legitimate podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. The man who was chuckling there is Pete Charbonneau, co-host extraordinaire. Pete, I mean, maybe like small case L in legitimate?
Of course, I'm joking, Bernie. We're totally legitimate. How we didn't win a Golden Globe is beyond me, but we've got next year to make amends for that.
There's always next year, but today we have Noel Manning, and Noel's a veteran journalist and critic, pop culture critic, television, film, music. He's a member of major critic associate organizations, including the Critics' Choice Association, Southeastern Film Critics Association, Online Film and Television Association, and North Carolina Film Critics Association. Bit of a tease, we'll be heading back to North Carolina very shortly, folks. Noel hosts the weekly TV radio show Meet Me at the Movies. He co-founded the Reel to Reel International Film Festival in North Carolina. In addition to the media work, Noel has also served as currently is Associate Vice President for Communications and Marketing at Gardner-Webb University. And he's also worked and produced several award-winning documentaries, including one on Earl Owensby. So, Noel, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Just an honor. I really appreciate the opportunity, and just thank you for the chance. Appreciate it.
Know how you got into our lives. This is, folks, this is the behind the scenes. So Pete and I decide that we're going to go down 80s 3D movie lane. And Pete saw Metal Storm: The Destruction of Jared Sin, Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone at the theater. Of course, in the 80s, if it wasn't Friday the 13th, it was Jaws. These movies that were on the Mount Rushmore of 80s 3D movies. We then discovered Silent Madness, The Man Who Wasn't There. But during the day, as Pete and I are apt to do, and we're sharing a few things with each other, it's like, hey, this name keeps coming up in the group picture of 80s 3D films. Earl Owensby. Well, I found this documentary about this man named Earl Owensby, the man, the myth, the legend. And sorry to our respective employers, but for the remainder of that day, I think Pete and I stopped working and just hit play on this documentary found on YouTube that coincidentally happened to be directed by you, Noel.
Oh man, yeah, that was a journey, that documentary, and I'm thankful that it's still out there and still finding new audiences for sure, because when I got a chance to get to know Earl back in 93, it was the 20th anniversary of him being in the business. I'd heard about Earl, had known what he was doing. I remember when I was in high school, I saw 60 Minutes do a interview with Earl, and I said, this is kind of crazy.
There's a full-time staff of 40, and instead of putting out-of-town talent up in neighboring motels, he built his own motel. There are 2 planes, one for the corporate Owensby, and the other plane for the stunt-flying actor Owensby. In the middle of it all is a big, comfortable home that also doubles as a movie set. And of course, his private runway is just outside the front door. All of this on the outskirts of Shelby, North Carolina, population 16,000. Where you'd think Variety might be planting alfalfa instead of tobacco, and a Hollywood Reporter might be someone you'd run out of town.
And I had cousins who actually lived in Shelby, North Carolina, which is where Earl built a studio between Shelby and Boiling Springs, North Carolina. It was just always fascinating that there was this guy in North Carolina that was taking on the Hollywood system and doing it the way he wanted. And he didn't care if people said he couldn't. When people said he couldn't do it, it just made him want to do it even more to prove people wrong. And that was just that pioneering spirit, and also that don't tell me no. You just stand back and watch. So when I got a chance to meet Earl in 93, when I was working for a headline news affiliate, doing a small feature story for TV just on his 20 years in the business, he and I clicked. 20 years ago, not too far from the Rutherford County line, a Shelby man took on the Hollywood challenge by making feature films right here in the Cleveland County area. And in the 2 decades since, he has truly established himself as one of the most successful movie makers in the country, if not the world. Some even consider him a living legend. In just 20 years' time, Owensby has 37 films to his credit. That's nearly an average of 2 films a year. Right off the bat, it was like we were longtime friends, and I knew then that I would be talking to Earl well beyond just that one story. And of course, it did happen. And a few years later, got a chance to put together a documentary about his life, his entire life.
I am wondering, Noel, prior to 1993, like you said, when you end up working at Shelby Headline News and kind of cross paths with Earl, had you heard about Earl Owensby, any of his films, or let alone like Earl Owensby Studios? Like you mentioned, you had some family in the area, but had you heard of him?
Yeah, in the 80s was the first time I had heard about him. So it was the early 80s. I had an uncle who lived in Shelby, and is about this filmmaker and closing off the streets of Shelby, North Carolina for cars turning upside down and crashes, and they were just telling me all these crazy stories, and I said, oh, I would love to see that. I would love to be close to that. Then I moved to this area, so I came to Gardner-Webb University in 1988. So it was then that I really got a chance to know more and more and more about him, because I would drive by his studio and said, yeah, one day I want to go in there and I want to find a way to meet him. And what I didn't realize at that time, that if I had just gone, walked through the doors and walked down the hall, Earl would have welcomed me with open arms. It took me a few years later, about 11 years later after I heard about him, before I got a chance to actually meet him.
The moment of truth. Let's go.
Forget everything you've ever seen. Forget everything you've ever heard. Forget everything you've ever experienced. There's everything you've ever known about adventure. And then there's The Abyss, rated PG-13. Opens Wednesday, August 9th at theaters.
And that was being shot at Earl's facility in Gaffney, South Carolina. He bought the former Duke Power Company nuclear power plant that had never been finished, never been complete. And he went in there with the idea of making, a movie studio, having a movie studio out of it. And I ended up utilizing it for a few films. And The Abyss was one of those. 20th Century Fox came. He and James Cameron, Earl and James Cameron, got to be really good friends. They actually got to be friends much earlier during the filming of Terminator. That was the first time that they got a chance to meet. And they were actually looking at doing the Terminator much earlier, and we're talking to Earl about that possibility of utilizing some of the stuff here. They ended up using other areas, but he and Earl developed a really interesting friendship there. And then talking about 3D films.
This latest film, not yet released, is called Rottweiler. Earl is the sheriff in a small town. A pack of killer Rottweilers escape from a top-secret military project and start snacking on the townsfolk. Jaws with paws, Earl calls it. What makes Rottweiler truly special is it is being filmed in 3D, the effect of which is to make the dreaded dogs leap right into your lap. Nobody's filmed in 3D in 25 years in this country. That and a budget 3 times his normal $400,000 might indicate that Owensby is taking an uncharted risk. Hardly when you realize that an average Hollywood movie costs $10 million and 7 out of 10 lose money. So far, Owensby has made 18 movies and has not lost a penny yet.
When you talk about like the 6 3D films that he did, and I mean, I think it's pretty fair to call him a renegade for kind of bucking, like, as you said, the Hollywood system for his entire career, which is amazing and fascinating. And I think his whole story is just one of those that it's almost unsung, which I think is another reason why Bernie and I were so taken with your documentary, because for us, it was just uncovering all these amazing details about someone that Bernie and I have seen so many movies, collectively together apart, like growing up. It's like how he was never on our radar in any way was kind of mind-blowing to both of us. But when you talk about the 3D stuff, like with his crew, that he kind of seemed like he kept a pretty tight crew, that they all kind of worked on a lot of those films together. They in many ways became experts in 3D filmmaking because they did so many and they got so many reps in. I know that they worked with Chris Condon with some of his, was it Stereo Vision that he had developed? But like, yeah, to be able to have like Hollywood come knocking to be like, we need some expertise, and you guys seem to be pretty well versed in making 3D movies. So what do you got?
Yeah, I think that was the thing, is that Earl did kind of buck that Hollywood system, and a big part of that is because they did not want to accept him until they did. They thought he was just a country boy. He's just some independent guy. Let him do his first movie, and then we'll kind of go on. But Earl was never in this to make just one film. He was always determined, I'm going to create a studio. I'm going to create a movie factory.
I decided to go into the movie business. I didn't decide to make a movie. I said, we are going into the movie business, and I'm going to create a studio, and I'm going to make a movie. And the first one has to be made. If you're going to manufacture automobiles, you have to make the first one.
Ipso facto, Earl Owensby was in the movie business. Producer, financier, and star.
His whole concept, his whole mindset of putting this together was thinking about it from the old Hollywood. You've got another one, and you do that same cast and crew. If they want to stick around, they've got a job. You finish a movie on Friday, you finish shooting it Monday, come back in to the office. And that was his concept, and that was his mindset. In North Carolina, sure, there have been films shot, but there had been no one who said, I'm going to build a studio in a rural area. It's not Charlotte. It's not Raleigh, North Carolina. It's Boiling Springs and Shelby, North Carolina, an hour between Asheville and Charlotte. This is not where you would think about building a movie studio. But Earl said, this is my home. This is where I'm going to build it. I'm not that far from Charlotte. I can get to the airport there. If I want to go to Asheville, to a smaller airport there. And Earl even built his own landing strip on his studio because he was a pilot, and so he thought of everything.
Owensby, the producer, saved a fortune by hiring Owensby as the star, and then using Owensby to fly the planes, drive the cars, build the sets, and do the stunts, all without benefit of a single union.
Let me go, challenge!
In 1974, when this film was made, the average Hollywood movie cost $4 million to make. Owensby made Challenge for less than $400,000.
Did it make money?
Doubled its investment, at least, and still makes money.
His kind of bucking Hollywood and taking Hollywood on rubbed some people the wrong way, but there were some smart people in Hollywood that realized, wait, this guy's making money, and he's doing it right for the audiences that he knows he can get. And when Earl discovered that overseas market, when he discovered that's where he was going to make money, never did he even worry anymore about, was this film going to be playing in the Southeast? And that was his initial concept. Hey, I'd love to get a film shown in North Carolina, South Carolina, multiple outlets. And if we get Georgia, that's wonderful. And when he sold the foreign rights, the international rights, or he leased them basically, got the books back, that's when he realized, wow, okay, my movies are making how much overseas? That blew him away. You know, if you think back prior to the pandemic, Hollywood movies were making most of their money in the international market. But Earl was way ahead of the game on that before Hollywood ever thought about the international market. Talk about him being a pioneer, definitely a pioneer in that. And then the 3D films, here's an independent guy that's doing it and realizing, okay, that's a gimmick. You can make money doing that. Again, Earl set that standard.
There's something insanely fascinating to me about the idea of Earl not doing a passion project, because in some ways, when you think about filmmaking, creativity, that kind of pushes the wagon. Here's someone who has a story to tell. Maybe it's personal. They sink all of their life savings in, and maybe it was able to like defy gravity and it becomes a thing. But you just like, how many people have you heard of that are less interested in a passion project and are more interested in production, in creating a machine? So that's the thing that's fascinating about Earl. It seems like there's equal parts creativity, because you can't discount that. But the man sure was very aware of the capitalism piece about filmmaking. And in some ways, the perfect microcosm story. You'd mentioned it on one of your interviews, talking about calling EO Studios to set up an appointment to speak with him, and he picks up the phone. Not a secretary. There's no bureaucracy. That is the perfect microcosm of what seems like Earl Owensby was. He picked up the phone. He was the first and the last person on the line.
Yeah, that was the first time I got a chance to meet him. So that was 93, November of 93, trying to set up that initial interview. And I'm expecting, okay, I'm going to go through a secretary, going to bounce me to some other personal assistant. Then I'm going to speak to a PR rep. In my mind, I'm thinking all these layers before I ever get a chance to speak to the man himself. Even if I get a chance to speak to him, who knows if that's going to happen. And he picked up the phone. I told him, hey, my name's Noel Manning, Shelby Headline News. I'd love to do a feature on your 20 years in the business. Yeah, absolutely. This is Earl. Come on out. There's something different about this guy. And then once went to the studio to do this interview, we sat down for easily an hour that first time I interviewed Earl, just going over his life story. I knew, wow, I'm gonna spend some more time with this guy. And I enjoyed doing those segments, and each of those, I think we ended up doing 5 of those little 5-minute segments that kind of captured his life. At that time, I had very little access to footage. So I go to the, Earl had some that he could give me, but others I ran to the, local video stores trying to, rent all the Earl films I could so I could have some good B-roll. And I tried to shoot plenty of B-roll while I was there so I'd have stuff. But yeah, just his willingness to talk to me about anything really set the stage for what was going to happen later, and the friendship that continued to develop over the years with Earl. And I in many ways, I've considered Earl, a family member. And I know at times he's called me kind of that adopted son, because I hung around long enough that, in Earl's later years of working at the studio, I was close by. He would give me a call at Gardner Webb and say, "Hey, Noel, I need to come by. Can I get you to help me out with something?" It was always, "Yeah, Earl, come on, come on."
If you don't treat it like a business, you can get rid of your money in a hurry. I would sure hate to go out and invest in someone else's film, because I think that's a bad investment. Even to a Superman that's doing such great business, when you start talking about $30 million for a movie, that's a lot of money. You got to recoup a lot of money to get your money back.
How many Earl Owensby movies would $30 million represent?
Well, I always figured if somebody give me $30 million, I'd put it on a CD at 20%, and I'd make movies till the end of time and still not spend it. If that would answer the question.
One of the things we kind of touched on is that mindset of doing more than just one film, but also, how am I going to promote it? You can create anything you want to, but if people don't know how to find it, it's just going to be out there. And at that time, you had either drive-in theaters, you had your regular theaters, or you had 3 networks and PBS. That was it. So you didn't have all of these different distribution opportunities. So for Earl to even get his movies shown was pretty amazing. But Earl also was constantly thinking about, okay, what else can I do related to this? So he would have books, he would have novelizations of his films. He would have movie soundtracks created from his films. So he was always thinking outside of that standard box. And always, if Earl had an opportunity, he would have had action figures for every single one of his characters. If he had the opportunity, he would have done that. I guarantee he would have done that.
Now I want a Mac McPherson chain gang action figure now.
with Uzi and additional extra clips. That's the one I want for sure. I will say I want to give a little bit of context to Earl's genius, because the first movie he comes out with is Challenge in 1973.
And now, William Reynolds with the news. Good morning. Political newcomer John Frank Challenge is rapidly gaining ground according to state and national polls.
I'm frightened about those papers, Frank.
Now, sweetheart, there's nothing to be frightened of. It's just something I have to do.
Mr. Challenge has the documents with him. Unfortunately, he has duplicate copies hidden somewhere in his home.
I think Mr. Challenge is going to have a very unfortunate accident.
Going back to the production piece of it, he was aware enough to realize that it's the late 1960s into the early 70s. You've got increasing crime. You've got inflation, political unrest. You've got movies like Billy Jack and Walking Tall that are resonating with that drive-in audience that you mentioned, Noel. And he's able to essentially jump into that bandwagon with Dirty Harry and the Death Wish movies that Bronson was in, obviously were resounding with audiences. And he makes Challenge. And I think, again, that just speaks to his entrepreneurship and also being aware of what the audiences wanted to see. So maybe I can't make another Dirty Harry movie, but I can make Challenge. And if I am not giving half the budget to this actor who was in the Fugitive TV series, well, maybe I'll do it. And fully aware that I'm not going to be as good.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Clark Gable, eat your heart out.
But you know what? If I get it to the right theaters and if I can exploit this foreign audience and get it into international distribution, again, just it's interesting because as we kind of go into the 3D world, that's all happening in the early 70s. He's starting to make these movies. Just 2 years later, after Challenge comes out, Jaws is released. And that sort of defines what we now think of blockbusters. And we've got Star Wars, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Rocky, Superman, big movies. And we're moving away maybe from like vigilante fatigue to underdogs and superheroes, guys in capes and big sensations. To quote Earl in one of his interviews, you know, how do you sell a movie? Gimmick, gimmick, gimmick. For better or for worse, it's in the early 1980s, 3D comes out. It's a gimmick and it works out. And he fully taps into that trend as well, from probably seeing Bwana double as a kid growing up himself, or House of Wax, and then thinking, I can make Jaws with paws. And then we get Rottweiler. I saw Star Wars. I can't make that, but I can make hyperspace. So again, it gives context for folks that maybe aren't aware of his movies. You've heard of Star Wars. You probably just haven't heard of Gremloids, but Earl Owensby is the guy behind all of this. There's a very much method to what others may have considered badness.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he always knew what he wanted to do. And when he felt like one of the gimmicks maybe running its course, what's next? What else can I do? And anytime I talk to him, and I've talked to him over the years about the film he considered to be his worst film.
What strange force possessed him? What evil being transformed him from mortal man to ravaging beast?
Because he said it was because of the horrible experience. Because he was he played the Wolfman, and Colin Glasgow was a character's name who became a Wolfman, and it was shot in this old Hammer Studios horror style. That's kind of what he was going after. And the film itself, I think it definitely holds up when you look at monster films and you look at films about the changelings, those creatures who can change from human to some other form. Earl was never completely pleased with that film, and Worth Keeter has even talked early on about that film and talked about how it was supposed to be this kind of British feel to it, but everybody was Southern. But I think to me that was the enduring charm of that film. Sure, it had that Hammer style, and if you've watched any of those Hammer films that were period films, you would expect a Christopher Lee, to come out and speak, but you wouldn't expect a Cliffside, North Carolina Earl Owensby to be talking like that. But it worked. It really worked, and it resonated with audiences, especially Southern audiences. And then we talk about translating this again to international audiences. They have subtitles, or either they have them dubbed, and so those things connected as well. And then after Wolfman in 79, Elvis Presley passed away, and Earl absolutely loved Elvis Presley, and had the opportunity to do a fictionalized story about a character kind of like an Elvis Presley. It was absolutely based on the life or the lifestyle of Elvis. Even had Elvis's former girlfriend, Ginger Alden, play in the film. Roy Orbison, the legend, legendary Roy Orbison, did the soundtrack for this. Earl just was never afraid and ask people or to get introduced to them. And if there were people who he would consider his idols or his legends that he said, I want to know them, he reached out. And many of them would return the phone calls, and many of them would return favors and want to be a part of it. Don Redberry, a legend of Westerns, got a chance to be in Earl films. And so I just appreciated that Earl wasn't afraid to take risk and wasn't afraid to pick up a phone and call people he never met before, because his whole mindset was, well, all they can do is hang up on me or say no. That's no big deal. It happens to me every day. That's kind of his mentality.
If only we all had that, just, self-awareness and not worry so much about the rejection. Like, you're just like, just roll it off. We'll just keep moving.
But I don't think Laurence Olivier is going to lay down tonight and not be able to sleep because someone's after his job. Can't you see me speaking them Hamlet words and you alls? Yeah. The art in the movie business to me is the dead president's pictures, the George Washington's, the Ulysses S. Grant, and little Benny Franklin on the $100 bills. That's the art for it. Yeah.
Oh, they tell me Earl's coming.
Did he ever express to you, because he seemed to have a pretty good idea of who he was and what he was about and what he was trying to do. And obviously he branched out into the international as a way to bring in more money. Did he ever express to you like a desire to kind of break out of that regional filmmaking that he was doing, or did he see himself more as kind of like an antithesis to Hollywood, or was he hoping to maybe have a breakout, or I'm sure he would have loved a wider release, but was that a driving factor in him, or was he more just concerned with doing what he wanted to do?
I think it was more of what he wanted to do. And for Earl, it was a business. It was a business first and foremost. His terminology was it shouldn't be just about art. It should be about, it ought to make money. It ought to make money is what it ought to be. That was his driving force was, this is a movie business. So business first. So what can I sell? I think his expansion and maybe some other things he wanted to do, I think The Abyss was probably starting that standard. Also, he worked, had 20th Century Fox come in and lease the studios. They did a film called Reuben, that had got an Oscar nomination for, I think it was screenplay. Tom Conti was in that. Kelly McGillis, who later went on to Top Gun. This was her first feature film shot in Shelby, North Carolina. That was a 20th Century Fox production, but they used Earl's facility. So I think for Earl, he was thinking, I don't have to make movies anymore. The ones I want to make, sure, it's going to be fine. I'm going to have a very specific set of ideas in mind. But if studios want to utilize and shoot in this part of North Carolina, they can use my facility as their home base.
You have a very moral approach. I gather you're a very moral man.
Don't drink, smoke, chase girls, right?
You sometimes lease your facilities here to Hollywood types for movies. They may not have the same moral standard that you do. What do you do when they come? What do you tell them?
Well, we normally have a little meeting and explain to everybody that we're just country people here, and the only thing going up your nose better be your finger. And, we don't allow no left-handed cigarettes. What they do when they get off the park, that's their own business.
I've got motel rooms they can stay in, so the crew or cast can stay in there. So he really set it up as a full-blown location for filmmakers to come in, and also having the sound stages, they could utilize that. So I think that was a direction that he was really wanting to transition, and did that with a few films. And then when he worked with Cameron and with 20th Century Fox on The Abyss, that changed everything. I think that was the film and the project that made him step back and rethink that whole concept of, do I really want to utilize my studio as a home base anymore? As a lot of things happened. I mean, 20th Century Fox, when they decided they didn't want to pay all the money, some challenges for sure.
I would say it's a little bit of a reoccurring theme again too with Mr. Owensby, that idea of the Hollywood of the East with Dino De Laurentiis in Wilmington, I believe, and how he created Dino De Laurentiis Entertainment Group that became Screen Gems. But I don't know, I think about all of the logos that I see now at the end of television shows and movies that have the Georgia peach and getting to know about Earl Owensby, and now having that context and realizing that what he did with EO Studios, and like you mentioned, Noel, legitimizing the region, letting Hollywood know that there are facilities available that will absolutely work in their productions. Dino De Laurentiis contributing to that. When then I think it was like Firestarter, Blue Velvet, Maximum Overdrive, Cat's Eye. I'll stop there because we've got like a 50% Stephen King batting average. So that feels like that's pretty good. But all of this just kind of, going towards the like, now you're justifying a state level incentives. You're starting to set up an infrastructure for the trades, electricians and carpenters. If you saw that peach at the end of The Walking Dead or a recent Marvel movie, you're like, oh, they do a lot of things in Georgia. But there's also a part of this where Earl is a part of that story to realize, yes, but before we saw that peach, North Carolina was a part of this, and Earl is very much a big part of that story.
Yeah, if you trace the DNA of what's happening in Georgia right now in film and TV, it absolutely goes through Shelby and Boiling Springs, North Carolina. Because in 83, De Laurentiis was coming to Shelby, North Carolina to film Firestarter. So they scouted all the locations, utilized actually a lot of folks who worked with Earl with location scouting and some other things as well. And I think ultimately they could never really come to a complete agreement on what to decide to do. Worth Keeter has shared some stories about being in that room with Dino and Earl, and also Bill Arnold, who used to be the North Carolina Film Commissioner, talked a little bit to me about that conversation when he was there, and hearing both of them talk. You got Dino speaking, Italian over here. You got Earl speaking Cliffside over here. And he said it was like literally another world when you have the interpreters trying to interpret for both of them. And ultimately, that partnership did not work out. But when you look at the movie Firestarter, and that came out in 84, you look at the locations that were used. They were the locations that would not have happened had it not been for Dino coming to Shelby, coming to this area and talking to Earl. Rutherford County, Chimney Rock Park, really utilized quite vividly. So Dino knew what Earl was able to do here in North Carolina, and he said, okay, I want to do that. And he chose, after it didn't work out in Shelby, he went to Wilmington, established a studio there. As you mentioned, you kind of traced what happened there. It was built, Dino's, and then it was Screen Gems, and then on and on and on. But Earl never got any of the North Carolina state incentives. They didn't have any of those kinds of things, those tax credits or things like that. If Earl had been able to have gotten that early on, I could only imagine what could have happened, because that would have meant more money. And so that would have meant being able to get some of the named talent that maybe he would have wanted, and not having to take on some of these things on his own. And then what happened is, when politics gets involved, some things changed. And when that changed, the films that were being shot here left. They went to Georgia, and they've never come back to the extent. Georgia found a way to embrace them. In Georgia, just like North Carolina, you've got some great rural communities. You've got some big city landscapes. You've got ocean. You've got mountains. You've got everything in between, from the foothills all the way to those mountains. And that is one of the things that makes these two states really appealing to filmmakers, because really within just a few hours drive, or even hop on a plane, you can be to a location pretty quickly to get what you want. And the weather plays a big part in that as well, especially if you're wanting to shoot exteriors. So Earl really had a chance. He showed kind of what North Carolina could be, and others were able to come behind him. But absolutely, when you look at that Georgia peach, you can trace that all the way back to Earl. One state over, you can go over to McMinnville, Tennessee, which is where they shot Walking Tall. And that was the movie that inspired Earl to want to pursue filmmaking. When he saw that, he said, hey, that was shot on a low budget. I think I can do something like that.
If the people in his movie start looking familiar after you've seen your third or fourth picture, it's because many of the actors are Earl's friends from Shelby.
But since Earl's doing all right, some of these days he might get me that way.
What he does not pay in fancy salaries, he more than makes up in opportunity.
Bob, you can react to Owen here, can't you?
The director of this film, Worth Keeter, was a gopher 7 years ago. Then he became an actor, then a director. This is his fifth Owensby film, and Worth just turned 25. The cameraman, Earl Dixon, has no movie credits at all. This is his first picture.
He was able to really replicate that formula, because I think in your documentary he talks about how it was made for 2 or 3 million, but it grossed 40 million. He's like, I think I can do that. And that seems to be, from all the research and the reading that Bernie and I have done, that was kind of his motto, was like, I'll make all my movies for under X amount and I can turn a $10 million profit on them. So for a nice, tidy little small, independent film kingdom, whatever you want to call it, like there was like a really good template that he was able to build.
Yeah, it was formula. It was the old Hollywood studio formula. He kept proving them wrong, and he just kept on doing it. I'm in awe of what he was able to accomplish. To be able to call Earl a friend, I can't even believe I'm able to do that when I look at that body of work of what he did, and then having the opportunity to work with him on some things. It's a blessing and an honor, and I do not take it for granted. And when I got a chance to work on the documentary of his life, it was much like we were saying earlier, that we couldn't believe that there's not been a feature film on Earl's life. And that's how I felt about the documentary, because I'd seen several features on Earl, but nobody had taken the time to do a feature-length, in-depth documentary, tracing his life from being abandoned basically as a kid. And so I approached him with the idea of what I wanted to do, and asked if I could, if he would give me his blessing, and then if he would give me his blessing, I wanted to say, can I have access to your studio, access to your archives, access to some of those people that you've worked with? Can you get me in contact with them? And he was just so incredibly helpful with that. And once I got his blessing, then I applied for a couple of grants to help support it. North Carolina Arts Council provided a grant, and then there was another South Carolina Arts Commission also supplied some grant support, which allowed me to purchase some of my own equipment. And I look back at that documentary now, and if I had access to the equipment I have access to today, that documentary would be so much better. And so, best out of what I could with what I had. And so I'm thankful to open up his entire archives and let me go in there anytime I want. He gave me a key to his studio, and I had complete access. It just blew me away. I found things that he didn't even know existed anymore. I found his military ID from when he was in the Marine Corps. For these beautiful little gems that I found, he was like, "Oh, I didn't know I still had that."
No, the documentary it was 1997, right?
So 96 is when I got it out there, and worked on it for a couple of years prior, kind of getting everything lined up. But it was 93 when I first met him, and then a couple of years later, I was like, yeah, I really want to kind of expand this. And so so 96, 97 was when it was getting out there and getting released in some form or fashion. And the Mint Museum in Charlotte wanted to screen it, and then we had some other screenings. Earl hosted kind of the world premiere at his studios, and that was just a real joy for me. And it had a lot of people show up. A lot of my old friends from Eastern North Carolina came to watch it, and that was really about a year prior to me starting to work at Gardner-Webb University. So it was kind of a perfect transition time for me. And the amount of work that it took to bring that to life, because of all the interviews, my wife was really happy when it was complete, because she got a little bit more of her time with me. But I look back on that, and I'm so blessed to have had that opportunity. And I would love to, at some point down the road, I've talked about this over the years, to translate that into basically a biography, a written biography. And that still may happen. We'll have to wait and see. I've recently been speaking with someone. In the next couple years, you will be finding Earl films coming out on Blu-ray. So you're going to be able to have some interesting behind-the-scenes things happening with some of the filmmakers. And I've been talking to some of those folks behind the scenes about sharing some of my archives. I still have all of my raw footage that I shot with those interviews with Earl, and also the raw footage of all the people I interviewed over the years talking about Earl. So I'm excited that they're going to be able to get digitized and find some new life out there as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I imagine a testament to his generosity would be, I mean, you were able to interview a couple of his ex-wives for that documentary. So, I think it takes a certain amount of I don't know what, but for Earl to be like, yeah, sure, yeah, all warts and all, put it, whatever they're going to say, get him in there.
Yeah, and that was the thing. I let Earl see the final cut. He never asked to approve anything. He knew who I was, and he knew the story I was going to tell, and I was going to be honest about it. But I remember showing him that final cut. He and his wife at the time. I took it over to his house. He had a farm, a horse farm in Cliffside, North Carolina. And I remember taking it over there and sitting in their living room watching it. And I looked over, and he just had, a tear streaming down his eye. Now, he would say his eyeballs were sweating. He never said he cries. He said, my eyeballs are sweating. I've used that terminology quite a few times over the years, but I knew when I saw that. And he told me, he said, he told me how much he appreciated that. And he said, you captured my life. And he said, I don't know that I would have ever thought that anybody would have taken the time to do that. So he genuinely appreciated not just the time, but also the care that I placed on telling his story. And to me, it's important. And I was just thankful for the opportunity that he gave me, and I wanted to honor that. But I also wanted to tell something that maybe people didn't know, and I wanted to be able to get it out there. And so, Earl helped me. Once it was complete, he actually helped me with the distribution. He helped me with the copies. At first, it was just VHS. Copying them on VHS, and even and one of the things I did behind the scenes was I had a lot of friends who were musicians, so I reached out to them and asked if they would submit music so I could use it for the soundtrack. And so all the music that you hear in the documentary, original for that particular film, and then after I had it, I was just going to use it really just on the sound, on the movie itself as background music. But Earl said, well, Noel, how do you feel about, having a CD for The Man, the Myth, releasing the music? I'm like, well, Earl, I can't, I don't have support for that. He says, yeah, you do. He said, I'll pay for it. I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, it's about marketing. If you got the material out there, let's make it happen. So then I went into contract with all of the musicians, and basically my contract with them was, okay, I don't have any money to pay you. I'm not getting paid for this. But what I will do is I'll give you X number of CDs that you can have. And then if you ever wanted to buy them, you buy them at cost, and then you can sell them for whatever you want to do. And every single musician donated their music to this project because they knew what it meant, and they knew what it meant to celebrate Earl and celebrate filmmaking in North Carolina. And in a way, it celebrated the music of North Carolina as well. And so, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Earl was a marketer, and he was always thinking, what else can we do? What else can we do to keep this alive? And I'm so thankful for that CD because, several of my friends who were involved in that CD, who provided music for it, they think, but I still talk to them. They said, you remember when? And there are a couple of my friends who are no longer living who submitted music for that piece of history to go back and listen to what they created for that piece.
Earl Owensby films forever and ever and ever. For every Heaven's Gate that Hollywood makes, Earl can make 150 sons, grandsons, great-grandsons of Challenge, Wolfman, Death Driver, and litters of Rottweiler sequels. As far as artistic success, who knows? In France right now, there's probably a baby toddling around who will one day grow up to be a great critic of le cinéma who 30 years from now will discover a long-lost print of Living Legend starring Earl Owensby, the most underrated actor of the last century. There will be Earl Owensby festivals at funny little art theaters everywhere. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter. What matters most to Earl is the living legend that is inscribed on the doorway of the EO Corporation.